So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the day 3 of the IoT Solutions World Congress, live in Barcelona. My name is Carlos Mandolisi. I will be your host this morning. So I work for Trinity College in Dublin, and I was a former president of ISA, the International Society of Automation. ISA is responsible for curating the content for the Congress today, so I hope you are enjoying. Each presentation today will run about not 30 minutes, it's 40 minutes, I think. And the speakers will do their best to reserve some time in the end for questions. Before we get started, I just want to give a quick round of thanks to all of the people who helped bring this conference to life. First, to all of our program committee volunteers who helped to develop this program and to bring us this amazing lineup of speakers. Second, to all of the speakers for taking time to come here. And on behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank our sponsors for their generous support. Their contributions have been instrumental in turning our vision to reality. And finally, to you for attending the IoT Solutions Congress. We wouldn't be here without you. Now, without any further, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speakers. We'll have Sean Plankey. He is the global head of cybersecurity software, Willis Towers Watson, and Kevin Duffy, CEO, Maritime Imperative. Welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having us. I think everybody knows last day, best day, right? Thanks for being here. Today, we wanted to talk about international port security and some of the things that are going on in, forgot my clicker, in port security today in the maritime world. We saw a lot of different companies out there talking about maritime things or technologies that could be used in a maritime way. And we really wanted to cover what the threats might be today in that maritime space, how that relates to technology and cybersecurity in particular. So why now? Well, if we remember when the sun never set on the British Empire back in the 1800s, we've always learned that global trade, global economic power is actually what supports diplomatic power, informational power, and military power across the world. And countries today, after an era of globalization, are realizing that this maritime, the maritime routes, maritime trade is what powers the world. Shoot, I think you're blocking me. Am I too far? All right, there is another slide. There we go. So history repeats itself. You want to switch spots, maybe? Sure. 80% of the global trade in the world actually moves on ships. That's $14 trillion a year moves on ships. Most people think, how do you get your goods? How did I get what I'm wearing today? It actually came by ship, not by airplanes. In fact, one ship itself carries something like 200 airplanes worth of cargo, right? We can think about there's 50,000 ships approximately in the world carrying all different types of natural goods, finished goods, natural resources, and products for us today. Does everybody know what that ship in the front is? The Titanic, that's right. Was the biggest ship in the world. Right behind it, that's just the standard cruise ship today, right? So think about the size comparison that we've gone through as global trade and globalization has occurred. So world powers definitely know it. We know we had the NotPetya ransomware attack costing, this was an early headline. Estimates now are up to $1 billion. We know we have countries spoofing AIS. AIS is Automated Indicator System. That's how we track global ships, global trade ships as they move around the world. there's insurance companies, Lloyd's in particular in London, has said that 400 to 500% increase in the past 5 years on cyber attacks against maritime ships. Another study showed 1 ship a day on average is being hacked. And then, of course, we have the physical side. That UK in particular was this report. There was an attack in the Red Sea. People have followed, I'm sure, some of the attacks by the Houthis against global ships traversing the Red Sea. And then we have this one. Everyone knows this is how you get a ship out of the mud. This is the Ever Given in the Suez Canal. That block in and of itself crumbled U.S. crumbled global shipping, where shipping going through the Suez Canal is between 11 and 17% of global trade in terms of ship capacity through the canal. And then finally, most recently, this is in the Port of Baltimore. This is the motor vessel Dolly that ran into the Francis Scott Key Bridge and took it down. That bridge in particular has over 1 million people traversing it every day. And then, of course, the ship closed the entire waterway for the Port of Baltimore. People may not know, but the Port of Baltimore in particular is the #1 port in the East Coast of the United States to deliver cars, vehicles. So we wanted to cover both the physical and the cybersecurity side today. So I brought my colleague here, Kevin Duffy. Kevin's the CEO of Maritime Imperative and a retired U.S. Coast Guard officer.
Right, so thanks for the great intro, Sean. We've got a lot to get through, actually, and the way we organized the way to think about the broader threats in maritime security, both for the trade system, meaning the ships at sea, and in the ports themselves, is by level of complexity. So the first level of complexity is just an individual actor. So that's someone, not a complex operation, motivated by ideology, motivated by money, motivated by some political leaning. And these people take actions that affect ports specifically on a routine basis. Above that, you'd get organized groups. So picture more long-term criminal outfit or ideological outfit that wants to conduct some type of sustained activity, either for profit or for, again, ideological motivation. Above that, we know we have states get involved, obviously, and often states, piracy. We're going to have the coolest presentation because nobody else has pirates, I think, right? That's a very specific group. It still does exist today. It's a major consideration for shipping lines, and we'll talk about the hotspots and kind of the modalities of how piracy happens. Above that, we move to state action. So states want to take action that's not necessarily attributable to them, so they sponsor groups to conduct activities that further state interests. Above that, the states themselves will act in either surreptitious or overt ways to advance their interests, but it's short of a major hostility or major conflict, right? And then finally, we have the ultimate level, which is state-on-state action or war, maritime conflict, naval warfare. So individual actors, things to think about, and these are very real threats that do occur. Insider threats. So in the U.S., we have not so infrequent incidences of, picture the disgruntled worker in the port, and they have a habit of setting fires on ships and ports. This happens fairly routinely, more often than you would think, right? And that's millions of dollars of damage. You've shut down the port for some type of time, or it could be, again, ideologically motivated, or somebody who's realizes they can make a profit through theft or some type of corruption within the port. And obviously, this bleeds over to criminal activities. Sean mentioned the value of global trade. That's what is great about the global trading system is how much value it brings to us. It's also what motivates people to attack it, right? Because there's a lot to be taken, a lot of profit that people want, and they'll come to get it illicitly. And then, obviously, the last one there, political protesters. So The picture we have here, this is a group of people in San Francisco, ideologically motivated, climbed up to the side of a ship and wouldn't let it leave the port. They incorrectly believed that it was bringing supplies to the Israelis for their efforts in Gaza. They were wrong about that, but they were right that they could negatively impact the movement of the ship. It basically lost a day and probably hundreds of thousands of dollars in its very legitimate, regular maritime trade activities. So with each of these, we're gonna trace. Okay, here's, that's the basic legacy type of threats and activities we see happen. But there's always within this a cyber threat, either using cyber tools or being enabled by some type of cyber activity with each of the threats. And so we'll try to weave that in. Before I kick it back over to Sean, who is the cyber expert, my favorite vignette in this regard, individual actor, 2020, 40-something-year-old man, hacks into the information systems of the ports of Rotterdam and Antwerp. And he doesn't do this for a political motivation. He doesn't do this for a ransomware attack. He does this because he takes that information and sells it to Mexican drug cartels. So now they know the security procedures, the schedules. They have the names of the people that work there that they can potentially be corrupted. So he had quite a lucrative business doing this, and that's just an individual actor out to make some money. So, kick it over, Sean.
And on the cyber threat, I want people to think about this. We oftentimes think of cyber as a nuclear weapon or an act of God, an unpredictable measure in activity. In particular, in the maritime sense, often what we see in cyber is a physical maritime combination where somebody gains physical access to a port or a ship and then conducts a cyber activity to then enable a further physical action, right? So I conduct a cyber activity to change the cargo manifest, change, bananas to something else where I then, put drugs in a container and I label it as, let's say, bananas and ship it through the port. Or I do it to do some sort of like business email compromise type event where I'm using my access to the system, my physical access, to change routing numbers or change shipping labels or money transfers to pay for cargo.
So the next level up in terms of complexity is organized crime and terrorism. So organized groups with definitive ends. With organized crime, it's for profit. Terrorism is obviously more ideological. And they're doing something sustained to either steal value from ports or global trade, or to negatively affect it, cost imposition, because it's important to all of us, all states, to maintain that system for our own well-being. So if you're an adversary, if you can harm it, would be in your interest. So our picture on the left here, this is the port of Guayaquil, Ecuador. Basically, there's a low-scale armed conflict going on in that port right now and for the last several years between powerful cartels and the government. So this is a government patrolling that port. Regularly engage in shooting battles. The cartels are dead set that they will control that port and that the government will not have any type of freedom of action there to regulate or protect anything. And it's all about the drug trade. In that city, as a matter of fact, the mayor was assassinated last year, and that's entirely about control of the port for the movement of narcotics. Other examples of groups would be terrorists. So we don't have a picture, but the Abu Sayyaf group in the Philippines, essentially defunct now, but as of 10 years ago was operating. Was the world's most maritime terrorist group. Conducted the deadliest maritime terrorist attack in history, the 2004 super ferry bombing in Manila. So they were very expert at using the maritime domain to advance their ideological interests. It was a lot of kidnappings, seizures of ships, operating in the Sulu Sea. What we do have a picture of is a different type of terrorist group, which is eco-terrorism. This is in Washington State in the United States. Again, this is anti-oil protesters, very similar to the San Francisco situation, that if they can disrupt this trade, that it advances their ideological interests, in this case, commitment to environmentalism. So.
And you see here they're tying themselves to anchor chains, so the ship can't actually move without removing the people, and they'll stay there for days at a time. On this side, from the cyber angle, as we mentioned before, you'll see the cyber-enabled theft or smuggling. Additionally, we're seeing uses of common means of the internet, essentially to empower the physical action. So tracking ships, for instance, you can identify and find out where ships are going openly on the internet through sites like Maritime or Marine Trader. They list all the ships, where they're going, and in many cases you can find out even what cargo is on them. So you'll see criminal or terrorist activity use that to enable then the physical action.
And just on that last slide too, ransomware attacks. So this happens in ports with organized groups that are very good at this on a routine enough basis. Major attacks happened last year in Port of Lisbon, Nagoya Port in Japan. Ransomware attacks. Pay us so you can reopen your port.
Houston, San Diego as well. Yep.
So old school ransomware in the maritime domain was called piracy, which still exists to this day. This is the first quarter of this year. We won't go into the numbers, we don't have time, but the hotspots for the last several decades have been the Gulf of Guinea, the Somali coast, and the Straits of Malacca, so Southeast Asia. You see a little bit of it in the Indian subcontinent as well. Actually, it's the highest so far this year, which is not typical. But why do I say piracy is old school ransomware? Because the interest is ransom, generally. There's some armed robbery that go on board, take cargo or property and leave. The primary modalities, however, are to ransom. So seize the ship, take it where you want to go with it. Now you have hostages who are the crew members, and all of that, millions and millions of dollars worth of cargo on board, and there's a time cost imposition, right? So if you're going to keep a cargo ship for 2 months, maybe that's costing, in the end, for a shipping company, $60 million, and if the pirates say, give us $1 million, that's a pretty good deal if you're the shipping company. Obviously, there's risks and there's violence and there's all sorts of reasons why you don't want it to happen. And the typical international response to this has been international coalitions using coast guards and navies to either, in the case of Somalia, protect a shipping lane with command and control of various nations' assets that come together, or in the case of the Gulf of Guinea, because it's a very different scenario. You can't protect an offshore shipping lane because it's all in and out traffic. So those shipping lanes would look more like a spider web than a line. So what you have is what they call the Yawande architecture for maritime security. So it's a local control network of command centers that gets to track and plug in international assets who come to them and offer their services.
And when we think about piracy on ships, shipping companies have done some interesting tactics to protect their crew. We've seen armed security on board, but on top of that, most modern ships have built in a citadel, which is a safe room inside the ship where they can go down and then have like CCTV camera access and other access. But conversely, we're seeing pirates get smart as well. We're seeing pirates realize, well, the longer they stay on the ship, A, means they can't go ransom other ships, but B, it puts them at physical threat as well, right? Because the country the nearby country may take action against them, right? And that really goes back to the Maersk, Alabama, if you remember, where the U.S. Took action and saved the people on board and killed the pirates on board. So instead, we've seen some piracy groups bring ransomware on board, and now they're on board, they have physical access to the ship. There's connectivity everywhere onto the networks of the ship, and ransomware the control systems, the navigational systems of the ship, and because they're just computers, and ransom them and leave and say, hey, call me on my sat phone and wire this money, and then you can have, and we'll give you the key to unlock your ransomware. So I thought that was a pretty novel technique of using two types of ransom.
So very pirate-like activity, so it's an easy transition. I think everybody, or many, will recognize the picture on the left, right? This is 6 months ago. This is the Houthi group in Yemen seizing a merchant ship. How is it different than piracy? A few ways. Number one, pirates don't have helicopters, right? So that tells us there's something different going on, which is a state sponsorship. So they've got training and assets from somewhere where they can act very differently than pirates. Also, they still have this ship. 6 months ago, it's anchored off the coast of Yemen. They're not asking for money for it. The crew remains on board, 6 months, 20 people, hostage for 6 months. The other reason that it's extremely different is that this is ideological, right? They have a sponsor, Iran, who, as I mentioned, gives them the training, the assets, and they combine their political interests, their desire for control of Yemeni territory, among many other aspirations that they have, and their sponsors in Iran also benefit from the kind of the chaos being created and their adversaries not getting their assets or economic benefit when they would like to. In addition, it's very different, those activities, because for the first time in history, we see outside of the context of war, an actual declared international war, just outright attacks on international shipping. So these drones, that's a Samad drone. It's got a 5-meter wingspan, 3 meters long, and a payload of missiles, right? So it's not a hobby drone. And they have similar assets on the surface as well, so drone boats, right? And they'll try to crash them into merchant ships. They'll try to launch their missiles at merchant ships. They have sunk at least one merchant ship. So now we see, okay, this is an even higher level. This is a state-sponsored action for ideological reasons. Nobody's at war. I mean, the Houthis are at war within Yemen, but no international parties that are associated with these ships are at war with them. It's just an ideological effort to advance their interests and Iranian interests.
And then when we think about this on the cyber perspective, I actually think about the counter side to this. So how does, let's say, U.S. or British ships in the area stop an attack like this? Well, we know we have frigates in the area. You've seen the French also take action. There's been a little bit of a coalition of forces trying to keep the shipping lanes open through the area. Again, that's 7 to 11% of global energy moves through there. So significant especially to different parts of the world. Now we're talking in the electronic warfare side, right? So how does U.S. or coalition, U.S., British, and French ships protect the maritime shipping from the drones? Well, there's different, we would call, in the military, you'd call it electronic warfare, but essentially you're trying to jam the signal, hijack the signal, or disrupt the signal going to that drone, telling it what to do. And that's, right now, that's largely a military aspect. But when we talk about what we would think we'd see in the future of corporate, let's say corporate cyber activity, I think there are companies out there that are starting to that offer services for drone disruption, drone disconnection, return to base, drone hacking, essentially to send the drone back, RTB, return to its base.
So state-directed action, we talked about the Houthis. Now we can move it up one level and talk about their great sponsors in Iran, who also has quite a long history in the Arabian Gulf, Persian Gulf, however you call it, of attacking shipping. So even including this year, they have seized merchant ships and said this is economic payback for various other activities or sanctions. Again, it's not a war. They are sending their military on board and seizing property of some other country or countries. And this has extended to even more serious action, I would say. So 2019 in Fujairah, United Arab Emirates, 4 ships are there, and explosions below the waterline on all of them disabled them for months. And those were limpet mines placed by Iranian special forces. Again, testament to the value of, because this doesn't advance Iran's national interests outside of messing things up for their adversaries in the region and outside of the region. This is one of the seizures. I think this is the seizure this year that I mentioned. So just like the Houthis, they learned how to do what they do from somewhere. So this is Iranian commandos seizing a ship in the Gulf. Again, we're short of major warfare here, but it's ways that adversarial actors can impose costs through the civilian maritime trade system by disrupting it.
So then we start talking about the cyber side of that. Most recently, we've seen the reporting that the Chinese malware is being found in European shipping company systems. So this is not necessarily attributed. The arguments on is this the state actors themselves, military members, or is this state telling people to do it? But essentially, what you're saying is supply chain issues. People realize, countries realize the impact on the global economy, and they're saying, hey, I need access to this information to know how to better compete for a trade advantage, or to essentially be able to stop or slow trade that would then help my competing trade action. So in this case, saw specific attacks by an advanced persistent threat, so it's an APT, attributed to China in shipping companies' systems. We've also seen, at the same time, actions of Lockbit ransomware, Lockbit ransomware is one of the pay-as-you-go ransomware openly used in the criminal community, and also the nation-state activity community. So nation-states will target ransomware at an entity to hide another cyber attack that they're using, right? Because the Lockbit ransomware is commonly detected. It's seen everywhere. Most cybersecurity companies are able to detect, stop, or mitigate it. But if you're focusing there, well, I can use misdirection and put a more, let's say, sinister or capable cyber activity. And then, not to say that the U.S. isn't involved either. Openly attributed, the U.S. conducted a cyber attack back on an Iranian spy ship this year, and that spy ship out there was helping to enable targeting efforts of the Houthis and Iranians against other vessels in the area, and the U.S. wanted to send a message, so they conduct a cyber attack back on the vessel.
Then, of course, our last level, so this is the most serious, longest in duration, tends to be the most complex, and that's what you've seen in the movies, naval warfare, so naval gunfire, naval aviation, submarines, mining of harbors, all-out war. We see it right now in the Black Sea. I think Russians just reported they had a patrol boat sank. So very real in the world today. And this is the most kind of serious level. And when you see, if you think back on World War II, World War I even, how seriously the Germans took the efforts to disrupt maritime trade going across the Atlantic, right? We've all seen the stories, and there's movies about it, the Atlantic Patrol to protect shipping. So again, maritime trade, it's a major supporting function during wartime. So anything that can be done to disrupt it by adversarial powers, they will tend to do during wartime.
And so I want to talk on the cyber angle there on the GPS disruption. This picture here, and what you see in red is disruption or spoofed ships all throughout the ocean there. Basically, it's spoof saying, hey, other ships are in this place. In particular, at the beginning of the conflict, Russia spoofed a bunch of British warships and made it appear if they were outside of Russian-controlled port when actually they were moored in Odessa, miles and miles away, and not a threat. So you're seeing that action on the AS spoofing side and the GPS disruption. Right now, I don't know if anybody has ever flown into Tel Aviv in the past few years. Tel Aviv, as you come in on aircraft front, the pilots all shift to visual flight reconnaissance, so essentially manual mode when they're 500 miles out, because in the Syrian port of Tartus, there's Russian-controlled ships there that are continuously emitting GPS disruption that can affect not just the maritime aspect, but the aviation aspect there as well. So for safety, every commercial airline coming into Tel Aviv flies manual from 500 miles out because of the GPS disruption. There's some great videos on YouTube, of course, where you can see this happening around the world, where individual people are using their iPhones and they've lost positioning on where they were driving, and then you can attribute it to an activity in the port environment. We've also seen attacks against satellite systems. As we know, there's only a few companies, Hughes, Viasat, Starlink, that are used in the maritime community, and Marsat, and these systems are vulnerable. They have satellite and land Earth stations that are vulnerable to attack and disruption. And when we think about that satellite capacity, that's the means by which every ship at sea can talk back to the port and let their larger corporation know what's going on with their cargo. And then my favorite in particular are industrial control system attacks. And that's in particular when you see a ship or a port lose control of a system, such as a cargo crane, an automated controlled system in the port. Besides the cargo cranes, there are a lot of individual trucks that move without being driven by humans. So they're automated trucks that move cargo throughout a port. They're also vulnerable to attack and disruption. In particular, I won't attribute this to state by state, but I'd like to bring up the case of the motor vessel Golden Ray, which was coming into, in 2018, was coming into the port of, in Georgia, the state of Georgia, in Brunswick, Georgia, in the United States. And when you come into a port, you have the ship captain on board, but you also have a pilot. A pilot is a local who knows how to drive the port. He's certified to drive in the area. And in particular, when he was coming in, the port is a 18-mile expanse to enter, and it gets very narrow in points where if the ship turned sideways, lost control, had an issue, it would block all traffic in and out. Now, in particular, why does this matter in Georgia? Well, in Georgia is one of the 3 ports on the East Coast where U.S. nuclear subs go in and out of. So that's U.S. power projection globally. And he was bringing in this, the Golden Ray was a car carrier, and it was carrying Hyundai in particular vehicles that were going to the dealerships in the United States. And as he comes in, he loses control of the vessel, and he puts it into the mud off to the side of the channel, actually significantly right before where the channel gets very narrow. And I mean, said the ship actually turned on its side, and it spent the next 18 months there, where it had to be using exothermic torches cut in half and brought out in segments. And when interviewed, how did you do that? How did you lose control? You've known this port forever. Well, when he was asked, he said, I lost control. I had told the helmsman to turn the rudder normally, and the ship was just veering off course, and I couldn't control it. And I knew if I didn't put it in that bank there, if we didn't hit the mud right there, then I would have blocked, if I lost control in the channel, I would have blocked the entire port. So I took that evasive action. So when they questioned the helmsman, I said, well, he told you to steer a certain course. The helmsman, this is all in the safety report, so the National Transportation Safety Board puts a report out after any sort of major mishap. The report, the helmsman said, well, I was trying to put the rudder this one direction, and it just kept moving on me a different direction. And at the same time, the ship was listing. So when you list, that means it's tilting to a certain direction. Well, the report also shows that the ballast tanks were pumping, all the ballast tanks have fuel and water on board to keep it stable. We're pushing all one side at the time of the collision. So why were the ballast tanks all pumping all their water and fuel to one side of the ship? Well, when asked, no engineer had an answer. No engineer claimed that they did that. Is that a physical incident? Was that a mishap where somebody made a mistake? Or is that a cyber incident that caused it? Well, in the case of the Golden Ray, we'll never know, because the ship turned on its side and everything, essentially got wet. I don't know if you guys know, but electronics and water don't do too well together. So we'll never know. But there's incidents like that. Ever Given is another one in the Suez Canal, where we don't know why it occurred. Ever Given in particular, the common explanation was that the wind in the sail area of the ship blew it sideways. There's some physics analysis that say that it wouldn't have happened that way. Was there cyber activity? We don't know. Was cyber ruled in or ruled out? Right? We need to look at these mishaps and say, we need to rule cyber out and say it was not a cyber event, like conduct forensics to prove that it wasn't. Instead, still in the community, in the Golden Ray instance, in the Ever Given, there was never any cybersecurity forensics activity conducted. And in particular, in the Golden Ray, the U.S. government said, well, we need indicators that it was a cyber event, meaning you need it to be ruled in. Well, if that's the case, we'll never actually know. And you'll see state actors continue to use these types of cyber-enabled activities to cause physical world events, because they know those events will never be forensically investigated to be ruled out of occurring. So that in particular is also my prediction as we see 2024, 2025 in the future. Countries know, and individuals are now knowing that politically there's a talk of ending the era of globalization, which means they're realizing that maritime shipping is the way that the world moves goods, which means it moves money. And that's what I think we'll start seeing individual actions taken to affect the trade. And we'll obviously be using cybersecurity in that, or cyber-enabled attacks in that manner. That may be physically and cyber combined. Kevin, what do you think we'll see 2024, 2025, 2026?
Sure. Yeah, I kind of echo your sentiments. The way I frame it is, you picture a merchant ship at sea, and it's really a microcosm of globalization, as Sean just mentioned the word. So the crew members of that ship are going to be from 4 or 5 different countries. The ship will be flying the flag of or registered in a different country entirely. The operations company, so the company of economic benefit that is saying this is where you go, this is what you pick up, we'll get your crew members switched out here and there. That's a different country again.
Wait a minute. So we have we have the ship owner, country one. We have the, you say the flag nation.
Flag nation, the operator,
Operator two, and then you're saying?
4 or 5 different countries on board. So,
Okay, as crewmen.
yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is all to say, any time that anybody takes an action to disrupt or harm global shipping, they automatically have a lot of enemies. They're automatically isolating themselves. So we went through kind of the doom slides here of all the threats, and they are real and they are pervasive, and we shouldn't think they're going to go anywhere. But that said, there is a very strong international community, 14 trillion, every country in the world, fully dependent for its well-being on global maritime trade. Those who would attack or try to disrupt it really isolate themselves, whether they be states that do it, terrorist groups, criminals. Their list of enemies, when they take that action, it just proliferates. So, as always, international cooperation is kind of the name of the game. This is a maritime trade is a really uniting international force, and industry is really strong on protecting itself. There's great industry organizations, Intertanko, BIMCO, that look out for the protection of trade, the individual ports themselves, all of the companies involved, and again, all international actors of good faith. So I think cyber is the next front on that, but the international cooperation that we've seen to protect shipping in general from, say, pirates recently, I think the new front is cyber, and I think that's where we're going to see the big advances in protection.
All right. Thank you. And thanks for enjoying our presentation. Hope you enjoy the last day of the conference today.
Thanks, Sean and Kevin. Really interesting, and thanks for providing a lot of real incidents, because I think you were not very involved in this. I was surprised by the number of all the freight. It really moves the world. And
yeah, we never think about that.
Sometimes it's happening there, and you see the big boats, but you don't realize that. So
that's your stuff on board.
Yeah,
that's yours.
Yeah. So I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation and your insights regarding maritime security. I was reading different papers regarding this situation, and they usually mention that the boats, the ships, are based on legacy systems. So very difficult to control, with a very big, diverse list of providers. So it could be, or it should be, or it will be very difficult to control. Is this the situation? Is IMO looking after that in order to ensure that the ships are getting the best solution in order to avoid these cybersecurity situations?
Yeah, so they are. I agree with that. There are a lot of different systems in control on board. There are, of course, some major providers. One of the issues, I think, when people think about that from a cyber perspective is we think that cyber is a silver bullet, or we see the movies too much, essentially, right? Where the movies, all of a sudden, I took control of everything. Often, if you remember the Russian cyber attack on Ukraine, the Black Energy attack, when the forensics were being done and Ukrainian operators were there, they were actually tracing that the Russian attackers didn't necessarily know where they were in the system, right? They didn't know, like, oh, well, they're shutting this off now. And in fact, when they were flipping a lot of the circuit, the levers to turn power, disperse power in different areas, they actually didn't know what the outcome was going to be. I think that's what we see a lot of cases in the maritime sense as well. When, say, somebody is, remotely causing an activity, they don't know what the outcome will be of that event. So it's not necessarily like a silver bulleted attack where it comes through. It's actually more unpredictable than that. In that case, though, it can also be more damaging, because people don't realize the complex nature on board a ship or in a port of the systems, and they don't realize when you turn this off here, that it then causes an overheating system over here, a system over here to overheat, or it causes a lack of supply in another system. So I think we see those unintended outcomes. Unfortunately, seeing those unintended outcomes also causes people to dismiss things from a cyber attack. So, for instance, you'll hear an old engineer, in this case, working in cyber on ships, seeing engineers say, no, that engine just overheated, or we had an exhaust manifold issue. And you're like, well, that manifold issue was caused because it didn't have enough coolant or enough supply on the other side. And you're getting focused here when actually the causality was over here. And that's the true extent of a cyber attack. It's the second order impact that is the real problem, but the event occurred way back here.
So thanks again, Kevin, Sean. Yeah, we are going to do a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back.
Thank you.
Thank you.